The more grace God gives, the more people know about that grace, and the more it's spread around, the more reason we have to give thanks. Because there's plenty to go around. We're not jealous about other people getting grace. We want to see this love spread. We want to celebrate it. We want to share it. That's this overflowing with gratitude mindset that Paul speaks of. There's plenty of grace to go around. So we want to share it, we want to celebrate it, and we want to honor the God who gives that. And so in this text, Paul's talking about this otherworldly perspective, this eternal perspective on life. A perspective that we as Christ followers should have. But let's be honest, sometimes it's hard to see things the way Paul is speaking of here. You know, it'd be kind of annoying if someone who you kind of look at and it just seems like they have this great cush life, never had any problems in their life, to sit here and say what Paul is saying, to be overflowing with gratitude. You know, because we could look at them and just say, well, it's easy for you to say. But when Paul says this, I believe him. He's no stranger to suffering. We're talking about a guy who's experienced plenty of physical pain, loss, criticism, rejection. No stranger to suffering. So when he hints that we can have gratitude in all things, that we can have gratitude during suffering, I believe him. I believe him. You know the famed quote, first Thanksgiving? It came during a really difficult time. Now, the nerd in me has to say, the story you heard about the first Thanksgiving isn't quite accurate, but that's for another time. The general idea is pretty good. But the first Thanksgiving, it came out of grief. It came out of mourning. The Plymouth Pilgrims, they lost half of their people in this really harsh winter. Half of their people died. There was about 100 of them. Now they're down to 50. That's a crushed people. They've lost parents. They've lost kids. They've lost spouses. They've lost friends. People who got used to death. They've seen so much death. It's not even shocking anymore when someone died. This is a people who are grieving, a people who are suffering. They're joined by the Wampanoag Native Indians, a people also greatly depleted from diseases. People, again, no strangers to suffering. But here they are, gathering together, feasting, fellowshipping, playing games together for days. Because remember, suffering brings people together. The first Thanksgiving is Exhibit A. It reminds us, you and me, we aren't too different. We have some of the same needs. Let's meet those needs together. And so it's interesting, these people, even amongst suffering, were able to stop and see that there was some good in front of them. And were able to celebrate that and to relish that, even though they were probably still grieving. They were probably still in a whole lot of emotional, maybe even physical pain, but they still found a place to celebrate and stop and realize, well, we still have some things to be very grateful for. Similarly, Thanksgiving wasn't really instituted as a permanent civil holiday until Abraham Lincoln did so in 1863. 1863. We're talking about the darkest time in American history, right in the middle of the Civil War. How could anyone give thanks during the Civil War? But Lincoln kind of pointed out as he kind of gave this proclamation, he said, look, economy is actually doing pretty well. Probably speaking more for the North in that case. But the population is growing. No foreign power has come in and taken us over. I mean, that's a good time for a foreign power to come in when a country's in a state of civil war. An outside force can go in and take it and say, hey, that hasn't happened. Yeah, we're divided, but our crops are plentiful. There's reason to be thankful. So there's He believed that having all of us acknowledge the goodness around us could be an exercise in unity. Don't let the things that are really bad and negative, that seem to be all around us, keep you from seeing there's some things to be grateful for. There's still some goodness in this world and in our lives. Lincoln, like Paul, he knew that there could be gratitude amidst pain. And look, that gratitude doesn't fix everything. We shouldn't expect it to make the pain go away. That would be unreasonable. But it can reshape the way we see things. It can reshape the way we feel. And it reminds us who we are, and it humbles us. Looking back at the text, Paul calls our current struggles light and momentary. Now, if someone comes complaining to you about their suffering, I don't advise just saying like, oh, that's little, that's small, it's going to be, here in a few months, it's all going to be gone, don't even worry about it. I don't advise that. Don't say like, oh, this too shall pass, it'll be okay. That's probably not very healing. That won't help in the moment. Now, it might be true. It might be a perspective that you can look back on and say, hey, I got through that. It was just a small amount of time. But that's something that people usually have to kind of figure out and work out themselves. You can't make people see it that way. It takes time to have the kind of perspective. It takes time and experience to have the kind of perspective Paul is perpetuating here. I had a friend in my youth group growing up who was struggling with a lot of things, and they went to an older Christian mentor, kind of for a little counseling session, a little impromptu counseling session. This person wanted to kind of vent some of their struggles they were going through. And this older Christian mentor just kept saying, well, look at all these opportunities to be grateful right there in front of you. What a great, your parent did this. Well, what a great opportunity to serve them. Oh, you're having this trouble with people at school? Well, what a great opportunity to show the love of Christ. Look how much, you should be great. Look how much you're learning. Look how much you're being shaped. Look at all these great opportunities God is putting in front of you to know Him better and to let others know Him better. And look, this sweet Christian mentor saying all these things wasn't wrong, but it really wasn't what this person needed to hear in that moment. When you want to go and vent and complain about your suffering, you don't want someone to just sit there and say, well, you should be grateful for all this. This is great. You should be celebrating right now. That doesn't make them feel very understood. In fact, that could actually be considered this form of a toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is this mindset that all sad, bad, unpleasant thoughts and emotions should just be buried and avoided. We shouldn't do that. What my friend first needed to hear was, wow, that's a bummer. I'm sorry you're having to experience all these things. I'm sorry you're struggling right now. I really hate that for you. And the way you feel, you should feel that way. You're suffering, you're hurting, I'm sorry. So first, this person needed to feel understood. They needed to have the suffering acknowledged. We need to acknowledge suffering. Don't try to brush it away. Don't try to act like it's not there. Then it's going to be kind of like Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, then it's going to be manifest in other ways. You need to address it. We don't want to live in it. We don't want to dwell on it. We don't want to continually be victimized by our suffering. But we need to give our suffering dignity. We need to give it space. We need to feel it, knowing that it's okay, normal, and natural to suffer. And by naming it, saying it's there, we can begin to heal. I've said it a couple of times. God's people should be people who suffer well. People who grieve well. That's a weird thing to say. You know, it's not really like a compliment. It's like saying you're a good loser. But we live in a world that sometimes just wants to pretend it's not there, that doesn't want to acknowledge it. We're actually we're doing funerals less than we ever have. We're just kind of ignoring suffering. It's very unhealthy. It's very unhealthy to not properly suffer and to not properly grieve. If you look at Scripture, God's people have a good, long history of grieving and suffering well. One of the best things, we've sang a song that has some references from Job. After Job suffers, he's got friends who just come with him and sit with him for a week and don't even say anything. Probably a long, miserable week. But man, I bet he felt loved. I bet he felt cared for. I bet he felt understood in that moment. They gave that suffering space, time, and dignity. And they always say with Job's friends, it was really when they started talking, when they started messing stuff up. But as we think about gratitude in hard times and in suffering, we must first give suffering its due. The Plymouth Pilgrims, Lincoln, they acknowledged suffering amongst gratitude. And so we don't just start off saying thanks. We've got to kind of acknowledge, we can acknowledge the pain and the hurt. Then with time, maybe we can see the gratitude amongst that stuff. So Paul he's really in this text, he's asking us to kind of zoom out in tough times. Don't just look at the struggle, kind of look at the big picture. We're being formed and shaped for something bigger. And again, in the moment, that's hard to see. But in the perspective of eternity, the things that seem big now maybe won't be. But don't diminish it in the moment. Right now, they're big. In the moment, they feel big. But maybe think about that for a minute. Do you have any suffering or any hard moments in your life that you can look back at and see with a little bit of gratitude? Not that you're thankful for the whole thing, not that you're like, well, I'm really glad that this horrible thing happened to me, but can you look back at it and see some moments of gratitude in it? See some ways that it shaped you, that you can be grateful for? Maybe you can see how people showed up for you during those hard times. Maybe how you developed some empathy, or maybe some resilience. Maybe how your faith was strengthened, or how you saw God showing up in that moment. Maybe you can see how you're a better person from it. Maybe you can even kind of look at that and view yourself as a survivor and be proud of yourself. You did it. You made it through. A resilient survivor. So you can see how suffering restores and renews us, like the text says, how it shapes us and strengthens us. In Galatians, we don't have time to unpack all of this stuff, but Paul uses this analogy of giving childbirth. A terrible, painful process. So I'm told. I wouldn't know. But at the end of this painful process of childbirth, no mom says it wasn't worth it. No mom says, I wish I didn't do that. It was that pain was totally worth what came out of it. There's a lot of things where you might think, wow, that was really terrible. But here I am, better and more blessed than ever because of it. Childbirth's a good example of that. So it's hard to be grateful in the moment, right? But sometimes we can look back at some experiences and experience some real gratitude. Another one I've been thinking about is there gratitude in grief? I think there's a lot of gratitude in grief. It's a weird mix of emotions to feel. But yeah, it's kind of a cliche thing. You don't know what you got until it's gone, but you're grateful for that thing when it's gone. And so, thinking about grieving a person, you miss those moments with that person. You miss those conversations. Maybe there's times where there's this thing that happens and you're like, man, I wish I could talk to this person that I've lost. I wish I could talk to them about this experience right now. I wish they could see this now. But it's looking back at those moments with that person that you love and miss now. You feel these mixed emotions, right? Sadness that they're gone, but grateful that you ever had those moments at all. Grateful for the moments you had with them. Grateful that they were in your life. Sad that the person's gone, but grateful that you had them. And it's this kind of gratitude that moves you from anger and sadness at their loss, even though that's kind of an ebb and flow, right? To realizing the person you are grieving isn't someone that was taken from you, but someone that was given to you. It's about what you have, not about what you don't have. And that feeling comes and goes. Sometimes there's anger, sometimes there's gratitude. It's fluid. Gratitude, especially in grief and suffering, is fluid and fleeting. It comes and goes. And it's mixed with other emotions. Gratitude and guilt, grief and guilt are often tied together. And there's sadness in there, and there's joy in there. But the overflowing mindset says, this person wasn't taken from me, they were given to me. Finding gratitude amongst suffering, not for the suffering. It's hard for me to be thankful for suffering, but amongst the suffering, I can do that. I'm not grateful for the terrible things I'm dealing with, but I'm finding things to be grateful for amongst the suffering. When you do that, it will reshape the way you see and feel suffering. It's still hard, still painful. You're still going to feel. It's not going to fix everything, but it helps you to cope. Gives you a little more hope. Gives you a little more peace. I think some of you guys are really jumping the gun on Christmas. I've seen Christmas lights out for like weeks now. I don't know if you guys have already watched It's a Wonderful Life yet. Chris Meeks will tell you it's not a Christmas movie. It's a Christmas movie. But it does work really well for Thanksgiving too. And It's a Wonderful Life, if you haven't seen it, you've had like 60 years to see it, so spoiler alert's coming. He's happy, he's a guy, contemplating, do I even want to live? But at the end, he's happy. But it's not because his circumstances had changed. His circumstances have not changed. It's his perspective. Remember, he's even excited. He's like, man, I'm going to jail. This is great. He's happy to be alive. He found gratitude in life among suffering. Now, at the end, things get fixed. But he's happy before that because a perspective change, not a situation change. There's a good example there. So be on the lookout for that when you watch it this Christmas season, if you haven't already. But when I look at the history of Israel, when I look at the story when I look at Paul's story, when I look at Paul's attitude, when I look at the life of Christ and the 2,000-year history of the church, because of our trust in God, because of our gratitude, we are a people who suffer well. I can't help but think, wow, we're people of conviction. People that believe so much that we're willing to suffer and still remain faithful. Kind of makes me proud. Kind of makes me proud of who we are as a church and who we are as people. It makes me want to pound my chest. We're a people of perseverance, of resilience, a people who are afflicted but not crushed, a people who are perplexed but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, beat down but not destroyed. No suffering will stop us. Not cancer, not divorce, not broken families, not a vascular necrosis, not broken bones, not loss of loved ones. We're a people of faith, and we're faithful to a faithful God, always carrying around in the body the death of Jesus, so the life of Jesus may also be made visible in us. Look, I don't like to suffer, but I'm glad I get to walk through the ups and downs of life with you guys. And it's an honor that Christ is with me and with you in the suffering. And so I pray that we lead lives of gratitude, knowing there is going to be ups and downs, knowing that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. But either way, we're going to bless the name of the Lord. If you're here this morning and you want to give your life to Christ, or if you have any other need, your people are here. And we want to walk with you through the joys of life and the hard parts of life, knowing that God is faithful and we are faithful. If you have any need, come now as together we stand and sing.